Welcome back to Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And we're going to jump quickly into a specific topic about hardware for mob programming station. So what did you have in mind here, Chris?
Yeah, so I've been in the past responsible for putting together specifications for mobbing stations, right? So this is when our department was first growing. Now that people are remote, there's a whole lot of considerations. But I think that there was some good stuff that came out of those learnings and things that when I'm working with the team to try and figure out how we're going to standardize our hardware for our IT department to then order kind of standardized stations. There was some key principles that I think were really important to us. So one thing that that was pretty interesting was early on in mobbing. We had a lot of exposure to Llewellyn Falco, who was responsible for the approval tests library. And there's a lot of approvals in our code base, and those things actually hit the hard drive. And so, because we have a lot of legacy code that was done before XP had become popular within the company. And so what we found is that we had hundreds and hundreds of these approval tests, and they would access the file system, get the file, compare them. And so, I think with a traditional development machine, there was not a lot of consideration around hard drive speed. And so one thing that had a really big impact on all of our unit test runs was the hard drives. And so like these days, I'd recommend like an NVMe M2. Depending on when you're watching this video, you'd probably go for something different or more modern. But like the difference, there's like stages, right? Because you have like a rotating disk, and that has a certain amount of in out. And then you might go to an SSD, and everybody kind of considered SSD to like kind of be the fast thing. And then you go to something like an NVMe M2, and all of a sudden, it's like 64 times faster or something silly like that. And so I think you need to be really careful about what you're ordering, and all of the potential bottlenecks in the system to make those things happen as quickly as possible. So another one that's a really interesting topic right now is ARM architecture. And so if you consider like x86 and the number of instructions to do a low-level operation, traditional processors, Intel-based processors that aren't ARM, are doing multiple operations to do one thing. And 2018, the kind of end of Moore's law, we're kind of at the maybe the apex of processor speed from a physical level, right? Because we're going to have 1 nanometer or a certain number of atoms wide for copper, right? And so based on Moore's law. And so what that means is that we're going to have better processor architectures. We're going to have to go more to multi-threading and things along those lines. And so, ARM architecture, if you look at benchmarks between, like, especially for Node.js, right? If you look at unit tests running there, you have a combination of the two where you can read quickly and you perform fewer operations. Then your entire mob, this group of 4 people, this very expensive resource of the company, is actually waiting considerable amounts of time, and those things can be compressed considerably. And then you add on top of that this idea of remote work and cloud connectivity, and so you kind of want to spare no expense on the hardware for the interactions that the people are having with each other. And so other things that you might look into as well is going to be primarily focused around just waiting times, throughput. How quickly do people get information back to get an answer for something? And so build machines and things like that will also have considerable impact. Austin, do you have any Thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I can I'm less I a big area of learning for me is hardware.
Mhm.
I think I've avoided it for a long time because I'm always like, hey, if you can get it to boot the operating system, then I'm good. But
Yeah.
after, before then, I'm kind of like, I don't know, my dad claims he did this stuff with me as a kid, but I don't remember anything of it. Um, but yeah, basically, what I can attest to is that um, bottlenecks, kind of from like a lean perspective, it becomes a big deal, right?
Mhm.
So, the to a certain degree, design decisions impact speed of feedback,
Absolutely.
right? So if you write a lot of end-to-end tests or integration tests, it's going to be slow no matter what hardware architecture you have. But even when you do things well, the hardware can make a big difference. Like I can't remember. I think this was more a personal story, but I switched from one lap to another, and it used to take like, I don't know, 10 seconds to run my entire unit test suite, and then it took a second, and I was just like freaking out. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is awesome! So that means I can change something and test, change something and test, change something and test. And so, and it's not only for one person, but when you have a team or an ensemble or a mob, that is, 3 or 4 people, for example, waiting around for whatever it is. And so iterating on the hardware, I know, has a big impact, right, for kind of lean flow efficiency. And an area also I want to learn more about, so it's more of a question, is if you are doing a shared mob station in person or remotely, versus kind of the Git handover tool, which is probably where this episode applies the most, um, is when to have cattle versus pets, right? So you
Yeah.
can have a pet, hardware station in a closet somewhere on your company or organization site, or you can go to the cloud. And I notice I haven't done it a whole lot yet, but some of the other mobs I know of are experimenting more with cloud. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts there, Chris?
Yeah, I think so it really depends on architecture, and this might be a reverse Conway maneuver as well. If you're working in the cloud, then you're probably going to get a VM, and if you're working on a VM, you probably have some latency associated with, versus the bare metal. Um, I think that will, I don't know for sure, but I think that it's a limiting factor on tools like Wallaby or NCrunch.
Yeah.
And so I think that like super, instantaneous, multi-threaded, full test suite run feedback that you experience in those tools, I think will be harder to get. And so I think shorter term teams that work on shorter term stations, the whole the whole cattle scenario, those are going to be really good because your code bases aren't going to get so big that the interactions or full regression is going to take, forever, right? I think that when you're in something where you need to run a full regression regularly, then those sorts of things end up being really important. Um, so, I'll just say that. And another thing that I'll comment on as well, just to talk about downtime, is when you're ordering your hardware, uh, have a good idea of the frequency of failures. And so, because so for a year, especially when budgeting, I try and keep a list of every failure that happened to any of our hardware, and then have average failure rates, and then actually look for hardware that has fewer failure rates. Because if you the worst scenario is you're waiting around for hardware on order, which is like a nightmare. So that might be another little caveat to this. But we are out of time. So
Oh,
oh yeah, go
actually,
ahead.
one other thing I thought I'd throw in there that's I've noticed with cool with mob programming is how resilient the mob is to
Hmm.
hardware failure. So if a machine goes down or a cloud goes down, oh, it happened last week. Uh, we couldn't get into the mob station, but then we just started editing the code in the cloud and running the pipeline there. Like we found some like Python text
Yeah,
editor, wrote a little thing, and then put it in there and tried it. And then when it came back online, it was almost like, oh, you're okay, or
yeah,
someone else just shares from their screen, and we mob from there for a while. So I just thought I'd just throw in that tidbit. Go ahead and close it though.
yeah. No, and it's very true. You have redundant hardware, you have redundant people, and
Yeah.
so it makes it much less of an eventuality. But yeah, I do think that companies want to spare no expense at making their
Yeah.
developers as productive as possible, and this would be one of those areas that a lot of optimizations can be made. And depending on where your tests are running, if you're primarily on the processor side, you might think of ARM architecture processors. If you're thinking about interacting with the hard drive a lot, then during your testing runs or integration tests, then you might think about optimizing for read write. And so at the time of this recording, NVMe M2 is pretty cheap and quick, and you can definitely go higher than that. But and then yeah, so if I missed anything, or if anybody wants to chime in with their own experiences, please leave that in the comments, or hit us on Twitter or LinkedIn. And with that, we will close out. Like, subscribe, share this with anyone who's building up a mobbing station right now, and we'll see you all next time.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.